Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2026 NHL draft, which is following directly on from the 2025 NHL draft because we're just rolling them all together.
It just ran that long.
It's still going. It's still going. Hi, everybody. It's the Extra Shift. I'm Chris. This is Brendan. And the first round of the 2025 draft is done. I really genuinely thought at one point we were just going to back-to-back the two drafts.
Well, I mean, they can almost just run the first round into the second round. They're going to sleep for a few hours. And
why would you send anybody home?
Yeah,
I had the draft on, and then I had a couple of sidecasts that I was flicking between, and the amount of losing of minds that was happening on the Dangle podcast when they were like hitting hour 4 of their stream, and they were losing it, absolutely losing it. I think Adam Wilde was reading out super chats and read out Ligma Sack. And it was just Steve Dangle was eating raw wasabi.
Look, I was concerned at 30 minutes in when we'd done 2 picks, and I thought, like, oh well, look, the first few picks are the most important ones. After that, they'll pick up the pace. They really didn't. No.
They only picked up the pace when the draft house or the pot of awkwardness broke.
Oh,
so let's just get into it. We're not numbering this episode. It's not a numbered episode. It's just a recap. Because like we watched it, so you didn't have to.
Well, I got to admit, I did miss like the last couple of hours of it. Hang on,
can I just point out the fact that you can say I missed the last couple of hours of it?
Yeah, which was like the last 10 or 12 picks or whatever, which is nuts.
I, however, watched the whole bloody thing.
Yeah, I mean, I was reading updates on my phone, but I did have to go out and have lunch at some point with my mom, so I did miss like some of it.
I commented on Twitter to friend of the podcast, Leah Merrill, that I began by making myself breakfast, and by the time the last pick was happening, I was actually finishing making lunch.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It was a long one. It was very long, and it was quite weird.
I mean,
so
but it's okay. It's okay that it's long. It made up for it by being boring as well.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say at least it was long, but at least it was boring. So let's get into some general thoughts before we get into picks and trades and everything else. So, the pot of awkwardness. What the hell was that?
I feel like there must have been a competition between NHL teams to be like, who can have the most awkward setup with like the most intimidating looking like board of random executives that a player has to talk to in front of a screen. It felt like at certain times it was fucking Neon Genesis Evangelion in the room with the Sealy guys. Like it's like Jesus Christ, like what is this?
I think from memory, it was when the Kraken made their pick that I messaged you, and I said it looks like the Kraken are giving out their list of demands for world domination. Like they walked him in. Gary walked him into the screen. They closed the house of the pot of condemnation.
They're just fucking James Bond villains being like, we need $1 billion or we will explode the Earth's core.
And they're so passionless, and they're so. 3 white dudes sitting awkwardly with a black backdrop behind them, talking down the camera like, if you do not give us the money within 72 hours, we will remove New York from the Eastern Seaboard. It just felt that weird.
Yeah, and no one asks like questions that are like answered in any kind of interesting way. It's like, what does it mean to, to be drafted, at this, it's really great. It's just, and especially, coming to this organization of the, like a great organization like Utah who have existed for a year.
Yeah.
And
it was one of them got up.
It's like, what the fuck is this?
And just repeated the name of the. What does it mean to be? I think it was the Canucks. I can't remember if it was, but I'm going to use them as the example. He goes, "What does it mean for you to be part of this?" He goes, "Canuck." That's what it means. I'm like, you had no idea. I'm hoping you did better than that at the interview phase. But I just
they've always been trained to just repeat the same shit. Like there is no point. You could just generate this entire thing out of AI, and no one would be able to tell the fucking difference.
Speaking of AI generation, my number one question was: is Jerry Bruckheimer an example of AI where the technology is not quite ready yet? Because he looks like someone's AI generated a human, but there's something wrong still, and we're clearly not there. It was terrifying. It was absolutely terrifying. But I also wanted to know, like, we're talking about weird questions and, I just wanted one of the teams when they went, so what was it that convinced you that he was the next member of your franchise? And I wanted them to go, well, I mean, we really wanted Schaefer or Misa, but we couldn't get up to that pick. And so a couple of others dropped, and we just sort of like settled on him.
Yeah, he was kind of just like the next guy on our draft board.
Yeah,
like,
just next guy. And look, at this point in time, we're after pick 17. All of these guys are nothing at this point in time. None of them are playing this year, so it doesn't really matter who we pick. So we just made a call.
The best player in the draft is probably going to end up being picked at like 28 or something. So whatever.
Look, we've been watching. We've seen the number of guys. We worked out which name we think sounds NHL-ish, and we just sort of went.
He has the same name as someone who previously played in the NHL, so there's a pretty good chance that he'll play some games for us.
Look, if we take his name and we break it into a couple of bits, we can make an anagram of Gretzky, and so we decided that was the reason why we've picked this guy from Serbia, because not many people have the Z and the Y. Just one of those. I just want one of those. But the draft picked up pace when the draft house broke, which was good. And then unfortunately they fixed it. But I believe firmly that it was Boston that broke it, because it was the first time it didn't work was Boston. I don't think that was accidental. I'm sure they pulled the cables.
You're just like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm losing you.
I can't quite hear what. He's not actually breaking up. He's just going.
Sorry, we can't talk now.
Like, that's acting, folks. That's acting. It was weird. I did like the button. I'm not going to lie. I kind of really liked the trade button. It gave Gary Bettman, first of all, something to do.
He needs a prop.
He loves a prop. Like, he walked out the couple of times. He walked out to the podium, looked, glanced down, pointed at it, looked at the audience, looked around, and then went, bang, and hit the button. And Gary was having the time of his life. And look, doesn't it say a lot that the head of the NHL is most at his as pomp when he's pushing a doomsday-like red button? It just feels very Bettman. I also did like the use of eventually for most of the night, Junior Letang.
Alex Letang is future Penguin. Alex Letang.
He was awesome, but what I really loved about it was because the Penguins were up so often, he kept coming back. And at one point, Gary Bettman did make the joke that I'm getting concerned about child labor laws. But I love
they've used him in the organization an absurd amount of times already. Like, it is.
I loved it that they used him to push the first button. Gary let him push the first button, and by the end, did you notice that Gary had stopped bringing his father out altogether?
Yeah.
By the end, it was just him. Like, they didn't. Chris was like, "No, no,
it's fine. They'll let him do it.
I'm done. I'm not doing any of this crap." It was a bizarre several hours worth of, I think it was, they said that it was like almost 4 hours exactly worth of draft, which is far too long. Some of the general managers were complaining that they couldn't get trades done really because you get more trades done by going to tables and talking quietly rather than if you've got to pick the phone up, it feels harder to get a deal done. Whereas if you go to the table and you can sort of just tap someone on the shoulder and go, hey, if we have a chat, what do you reckon about? And I get that. I understand that because I feel like there's probably a lot of people who are not convinced enough to pick the phone up and make the trade, but would do it if they just had to walk a table over and go,
it's easier to feel things out, I guess.
You don't have to make the phone call because like it gets reported that you made a phone call. Yeah. And you don't want it reported.
But that said, like, there's not that many trades that happen on average these days anyway. I feel like it's been years since we've had like a packed trading, draft.
I agree, but I think that this was the draft where it was likely to happen because teams had talked about it before the draft, where they talked about the fact that they would rather have the player at this point in time than a pick to pick someone out of this draft because everyone's talked about the fact that they think this draft was a bit shallow. And that a lot of the players, once you get past about 15, most of these guys are probably going to be in a system for a couple of years before they come out. And whereas in some previous drafts, you get into the 20s and in almost the full draft and they're all playing somewhere. There are a lot of players that were picked today that people are suggesting will probably need a year or two in a system before they see full ice time. And there was a lot of talk that teams were prepared to move picks for players on rosters to try to make the moves work. And I think we possibly would have got a few more of those from a few clubs. I think we definitely would have heard from Colorado, because Colorado have been at the moment rumored to be all over the place when it comes to trades. Obviously, we'll talk about the big one they made today before the draft. But Colorado have been looking to move pieces around at the moment. And they're still not done with moving pieces around. And we'll talk about the weird rumor. Let's talk about it now. The weird rumor that went around today.
You mean the totally made up Crosby rumor?
100%. So this had come out earlier, and it had sort of been Kevin Weeks had mentioned it a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
With no source. And everyone just sort of ran with it a little bit, but nobody validated it. Then today,
every year there's going to be I feel like we've been doing Crosby or Malkin trade rumors for the last decade.
But it was even more stupid than normal, because the only person who picked it up and ran with it today was Georges Laraque.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but if Georges Laraque is your source for a Sidney Crosby trade, find a better source.
Yeah. It was pretty much immediately quashed by people who went like, no. Especially silly.
The way it got quashed was hilarious, though, because first of all, Pat Brisson came out and called it utter fiction.
Yeah.
Nathan McKinnon commented on the post and went totally false, fake news. 4 or 5 other insiders then came out with comments from people who would have direct knowledge if there had even ever been anything mooted, and went, trust me, the person I spoke to would be the first person to be aware of this. Yeah. Nobody has talked about this.
Yeah.
Right.
Everyone's forgetting that Crosby was a free agent like a year ago and could have signed with Colorado if he wanted to and didn't, and decided to commit to a few more years in Pittsburgh. Like, he clearly has a very specific plan in place.
And
unless you're thinking that it's drastically changed in a year's time.
And Dubas' statement after the draft was really simple. He's like, we're trying to build something here. We want to build something with Sid here. The plan is to build something for Sid. That's what they're doing. Everyone knows that's what they're doing. That was utterly ridiculous. But Colorado have been rumored to be in a bunch of other conversations. There was a lot of Bowen Byram talk today. There was a rumor that they were trying to make some moves for Byram. It was interesting to see what they were talking about, possibly trying to send back the other way. Marty Netjes has come up a few times in terms of they might be prepared to move off him to get Bowen Byram, which I can understand that move. I like Netjes as a player, obviously, but if you think in particular, we've talked about this before, I'm very much on the Colorado Avalanche are going to be a player in whatever happens with Mitch Marner. Then you make that move to clear some more cap space, get Byram in to help the defense out, and then you weaponize your cap space to go and get Mitch. So I think that's more likely to be what they might do. But that didn't happen. And in fact, the Colorado Avalanche held a press conference halfway through the draft and just went, no, we're done for the night. Like, we're not doing any more today. We'll talk to you tomorrow. See you later. Bye.
I mean, look, the reality is that people kind of forget that, like, it takes 2 teams to, like, make trades and do things happen. And that kind of,
trust me, the Islanders know that. We'll talk about that.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, just like the Islanders and the Penguins both had rumors that they were going to try and move up into the top 10 coming into the draft. Clearly, no one in the top 10 wanted to move out. Well, it's not enough to just want to do it.
Well, let's mention the Islanders thing now. So to start with, obviously there was the trade that was made. A couple of big trades happened before the draft, but the big one that finally took place, although again they pretended on the broadcast that it hadn't quite happened yet, so they could do an announcement with the fucking red button. So you had Noah Dobson going to the Habs for Emil Heinemann. 2025 first from Calgary and the 2025 first for the Habs, which were 16 and 17.
Yeah.
The belief was the Islanders were going out to get 2 firsts because that was the price it was going to take for them to jump up into the order to make sure that they could then go out and draft James Higgins, which is what they wanted to do. Now, this was then confirmed after the draft, round 1, when they spoke to the Islanders, who said, yep, we 100% went out and got those picks with the aim of jumping up to get Hagens. Unfortunately, nobody above us would move down, and Boston got to him before we could find anyone that would trade out. So the plan was for them to trade those 2 picks and go and get Hagens, but they couldn't get Utah to trade out. They couldn't get Nashville to trade out. They couldn't get Philly to trade out, which I find really interesting. They couldn't get. I'm stunned that Nashville didn't trade out. I'm also a bit surprised that Philly didn't trade out because they could probably have done with more of the picks.
Yeah.
But
yeah, look, definitely 2 teams that could have, dealt with having a wider breadth of picks. But at the same time, look, if you've got to look at it at both sides of that equation, if it makes sense for one team to move those 2 picks to take that player, it also makes sense for the other team to take the player. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, the interesting part was I don't think they thought that Boston would move out of it because, I mean, even though Hagens is from the island, he's attended Boston College. So that was the other likely fit. I thought that he threw a bit of a jab. It got missed by a lot of people. But I thought he threw a bit of a jab when they said, what does it feel like to be drafted? And when he did his sit down, it wasn't the first bit, he did his sit down. And Hagen's comment was, it's just nice to be drafted by a team that wanted to get me. And that felt a little bit like, well, you kept on telling everyone you were coming to get me and you didn't. So Boston were happy to get me. You were not going to give me anything. I thought that was not a massive swipe, but I just thought it was a bit of a poke of they wanted me to take me.
It might not be, but at the same time, clearly there was, obvious intention from Boston that was their guy as well. They went out of their way to got Adam Sandler to come in and do the pick and everything. Look, they clearly knew what they were doing.
Well, just quickly on the celebrities, and then we'll get into the notable picks. Quickly on the celebrities. First of all, I will never hear any slander against Bailey. I love Bailey. Bailey's amazing, and I love the way she played with the crowd when the Kings crowd started booing.
Yeah,
and she's like, "Hey, you better watch it. Watch it. Come down there." Also, I like that because it means that Bailey's not in Saudi Arabia and not taking the blood money this time. So, yay. But also, she's genuinely the largest San Jose sports booster you will ever find. She is a massive Niners fan. She is literally, from the Bay, and she's from the area and loves all of the San Jose and sort of California teams like that. So it was really good to have someone who actually genuinely loves the franchise make the pick, rather than, hey, Charles Barkley, you're a big name and you've played in Philadelphia before, so why don't you make the Philadelphia Flyers pick?
Yeah.
Or, it just, some of them felt like a reach. Some of them felt desperate. There were a couple of people who, like, I don't even know who it was doing the Habs pick, but one of the reasons why they actually did the buzzer for the Habs trade was because he flew in. So they needed to bring whoever did their trade out, their draft out, to come out and hit the buzzer because they had no picks. So it's like, we flew him all the way in. Come hit the button. Boom, trade. And everyone went, wow, they traded. Can't believe that. The celeb thing needed to be a bit shorter. And I liked in the second one, Bailey was trying to make it much shorter, just going, no, let's just move. Let's do it. Yeah. Let's get into some of the picks. So 1 and 2 go exactly as planned, thankfully, because there were a bunch of people talking about this idea that San Jose might move off Misa. I never thought they would, by the way. And as I said when someone asked me about it, my response was, Mike Greer so far in his tenure has just made a habit of making the right pick.
Yeah, and I think that was the obvious choice, given that, obviously they would have preferred to have Schaefer organizationally and, so forth. If they'd won the first overall pick, that would have been who they drafted. But Misa was absolutely the layup choice.
And the idea for me with San Jose now is that, like, if we're talking about all the talk about Will Smith and stuff like that, well, I think Smith played a fair bit on wings. I think what you're going to see going forward with the Sharks is you're going to have the top 2 will be Misa will play second line center. And then you'll have obviously we have a certain first round pick who's going to be our first line center until the end of time. But then you've got Will Smith playing on a wing. Musty will eventually probably play on a wing. Eklund's on one wing. Like, that top 2 lines for the Sharks in a couple of drafts suddenly becomes really dangerous and quite spicy.
Yeah,
So
assuming that everyone develops into who they're supposed to be,
yeah,
like you've locked up. It's not a bad choice to have. Like, it's not a bad position to be in to have two, centers that could be potentially first line centers on on a team. Like, just ask the Penguins. Like, it's not a
and I
big
made it
problem to have.
and I made it absolutely plain that I would have drafted Matthew Schaefer in a heartbeat, and that was who I wanted. And the Islanders, look, they could not miss on Schaefer.
Yeah.
And again, a stand-up guy. That was the only bit that the weird pot of awkwardness worked for, was
Yeah.
the Matthew Schaefer pick with obviously the jersey, where they apparently not only had they put the cancer ribbon on the jersey, but they'd sewn his mother's initials into the collar. So which was that was a touching moment. We probably should have put the pod to rest at that point and just moved it all on.
Yeah, I mean, look, so convinced that they were to take that pick that they preemptively moved off their number one defenseman, and look, obviously, I know that there are cap concerns and things like that, but I didn't love
the Dobson move,
the Dobson move. Like, as much as yeah, I just don't know that they're gonna be guaranteed to get that kind of, they really kind of hit something big with Dobson, in terms of no one has been basically a legitimate power play one quarterback in the island for a decade. They've had options, they've had attempts. There's been one guy after another, and Dobson is honestly the first decent 40 plus point power play one defenseman that they've pretty much had the entire fucking time of this kind of decade.
I wonder if the Islanders are a potential Carlson move.
Maybe
Because
I mean, I don't know what position that they think they're in. I feel like maybe they're more of a we're gonna break.
They should be in a we're rebuilding phase. I mean, look,
yeah.
I thought that they're,
if they are, then I get it a little bit more, because as much as he's going to be good value at as a 25-year-old or whatever, if they're not going to compete for the next 6 years, then it doesn't make sense for them to give him an 8-year contract for that's a piece that a competitor could use better.
I thought that what they did with their other picks was quite good too. So Kashawn Atchison with the 17th, and then with the 16th, the one that I was really hoping would just continue to drop, or that the Sharks could manage to do something on, which is Victor Eklund, which is the brother of noted Shark William. And again, I really would have liked, the fact that Eklund dropped to 16 was interesting. And the only reason why he seemed to drop was that he's 5'11".
And there was a lot of that for sure. There's still a lot of, at the moment that you're under 6 foot, you can add 10 positions to your potential,
speaking of that, let's quickly talk about Benjamin Kendall.
Yeah.
So I'm really interested, by the way, because on one hand, we talked about James Hagan's being a center superstar, and he's 5'11", and he's the same height as Benjamin Kendall and about the same weight. One of them is considered smaller than the other, but they are the exact same height and almost an identical weight. What that tells me is that people are a bit more concerned about Kendall's game.
Yeah, so look, obviously, an interesting and certainly a controversial draft for Dubas. He came in with rumors that he was going to try and move up into the top 10. Obviously, that didn't happen, and clearly that pick wasn't available. Instead, got to pick 11, made this what many would consider off the board pick. Someone who probably was otherwise would have gone towards the end of the first round, potentially, unless another team had, high opinion of him as well. I think that there's some interesting tools that he's got. Maybe they know something that we don't. Maybe he ends up being an incredible player. It's too early. It's too early to tell for sure. I don't hate it as much as I potentially could in terms of the overall value. You are, as we were talking about, the value certainly drops off after the first handful of picks in this draft, and the difference between 11 and 20 in this draft is not actually as big as it might be in some other drafts. That said, the big thing for me always with reaching for a player in terms of what we at least consider the expected draft positions is the potential value of getting more higher ranked players before that. Like that's all it is for me. Like I'm not worried about the like, oh well, you left, this guy, you could have gone this guy, you could have gone this guy, whatever, and this guy's guaranteed to be a superstar. I don't think anyone in that, that kind of 10 players between where he might have gone and where he did go is going to be like a guaranteed superstar or anything like that. But I think that there is a value in understanding that, well, most people consider this guy probably going to go at 22 to 25. With that in mind, we can take him with the pick that we already have at 22 and then take someone else who is more highly valued by other teams first. Like, I think that is the gamble that I would prefer them to have made, rather than kind of going, well, our scouts are like certain on this guy. We should take this guy instead of, like a player like you were talking about, like Victor Eklund, or someone who was kind of more expected to go in that position. Maybe he'll end up being a better player than Eklund. Maybe he won't. Maybe both of them will bust. We don't know. It's obviously way too early to know about these kind of players. I don't mind about taking a high risk swing, certainly out of the top 10. I just wonder whether you leave value on the table by reaching for someone that other teams don't consider taking at that position. There was no risk that he wouldn't be there later.
So to counter that, in terms of like to show how you can do something like that, it's not a massive move, but I will use the Sharks as my example. The Sharks, with their second pick, it was really interesting. So they went Josh Ravensburger. So they went goalie. And there were a lot of people, I'm also on the Fear the Fin Discord and stuff like that. There were lots of people there who were initially going, why did we bother to go out and get another goalie? Because we've got Askarov. First of all, you can't have too many good young goalies. You don't know what they're going to become. He's a very, very, very highly regarded goalie who was he was the one that was projected to go first round. There were two of them in the end. We'll talk about that in a minute. He got to 30. The chances of the Kings or the Flames deciding that they wanted Ravensburger, given that it is a niche position, was incredibly high. Especially for the Kings to go out and maybe get a possible goalie of the future that they can have in the organization. The Sharks liked a couple of players that were sitting still on the board. Blake Fiddler and Malcolm Spence are both sitting there, and they've talked about those two players. Fiddler in particular, who's a right-handed defenseman, very much someone that the Sharks would be very keen to go and get. And there were lots of people who wanted the Sharks to go and get that. I was perfectly comfortable with the goalie pick because in my mind, if you make the goalie pick, the chances of one of the other two being there were only two picks happening after it. The chances they're both going to pick the two players you want are really small. You can get a player that is a standout in that position and is something that's a bit of a different thing.
And a weakness in your organization.
Yeah, as well. And you can get bulk. Like you can pick whoever is left. The Sharks are lucky. Both of those players are sitting there. They have first pick tomorrow, can walk up and make whatever one of those picks they want to make, and they've got all night to work it out. Probably, I think they're going to go the right-handed defenseman. But I would rather they take the goalie now if they want the goalie than wait and hope the goalie is still there. And it's the same thing. I think with that pick there, he was still going to be there. No one was jumping up to take him. Given who was still left on the board, no one was jumping up to take the player. I would have been stunned, given that Jackson Smith had a lot of people talking about he's possibly one of the better defensemen in the draft.
Yeah, well, I will say the three people that I'd seen kind of tied to around about that position, because coming into this week, the Penguins had pick 11. They eventually got pick 12 as well from from the trade kind of finalizing. So they ended with those two picks, and around those positions, the players that were kind of people were mock drafting for them at least, not based on internal knowledge or anything, was a defenseman like Jackson Smith, someone like Victor Eklund, or potentially if Jake O'Brien dropped in, that was a player that people were high on. Obviously, he didn't make it that far. He went at 8 to Seattle, but there were a handful of guys. I saw a few people talking about Sean Atkinson, who ended up going, Aitchison, who ended up going at 17. But obviously, Pittsburgh weren't as convinced on those players, which is why they moved back from 12 and got two picks and so
Also,
forth.
Kyle has to move back. It's in the contract.
I mean, to be honest, I just would have thought like I almost would have if their plan was to draft Kindle. I don't know why they couldn't have tried to move back from both picks. Like, they could have gotten Kindle at 22 and moved back from 11 and 12 in potentially. Obviously, maybe there wasn't another suitor for that, and they had a pick in place. Look, it may turn out to be a great pick. Who knows? Like, I'm not super cut up about it. I'm just curious about, like, I think the value is the thing that we can speculate on,
because we've both talked about it as well. Like, I think we've both got the same opinion, which is the second of the picks, which was Bill Zonin, is probably the best of the three.
Yeah, well, look, I'm that's a player that I think Pittsburgh is going to love. An exciting kind of bulldog of a player, hardworking kind of two-way center. And
the comment that was made on him was that he makes the ice easy for everybody else on his line.
Yeah, hard forechecker and so forth. Look, they're gonna love that player, and I'm excited about him. I just wonder if you couldn't have gotten a little bit more value with that first pick as well. I don't know.
As well as that, like, again, I said, I tweeted a few times that, three things are certain in life: death, taxes, Dubas trades back. The fourth thing that's certain in life is that the Columbus Blue Jackets will take a Russian goalie.
Yeah.
Or a Eastern European goalie, which they certainly did. So the two goalies came off the board in the first round, which was interesting. I didn't see a lot of people mocking two goalies in the first round.
No.
I had seen, as I said before, I had seen that people were tipping that Ravensburgen could go in the first round. So that one I kind of anticipated. I didn't kind of anticipate that Andreaev would go in the first round as well. But that kind of isn't a shock when you think about who did it, what organization did it.
You ever said that a little bit more too in shallower drafts. That when there's not as many kind of difference maker skaters, you tend to get a little bit more. Yeah.
Take your value. If you were a center in this draft, and you were not drafted in this first round, you should probably be playing a different sport.
Yeah.
Because teams went out of their way to take centers. In a draft that is not deep, teams went out of their way to take centers. And it just felt like
4 of the first 5 are centers.
Every time you turned around, there was another center gone.
Yes. 7. Like 5 of the first 7.
Yep.
6 of the first 8. Yeah.
Yeah. 3 and 10.
Yes, 7 out of 10.
Only three players in the top 10 were not centers. And then it was just a run. And every time you turned around, there was another center going. By the way, just on a side note, did any player have a better day than Roger McQueen for Anaheim? I don't think there's a player that had a better day. So, and it was one of the things they were laughing about on the Dangle sidecast, because I was checking in with that. And they were like, you mean to tell me this guy got drafted? They put him in a helicopter. They flew him to Disneyland.
Yeah.
They walked him around the park. They took photos. They did footage of him meeting people. They edited that footage and sent it back. And the draft is still going.
Yeah.
Like, he literally went to Disneyland while the draft was on. Him and his family are staying at Disney Resort. And like, all they kept on doing, and you could just almost hear everybody stuck in this room for 4 hours. Every time they put another thing up on the screen of Roger McQueen going around Disneyland, you hear everyone in the room going, "Why don't we go to Disney? Come on, we're here.
Come on.
Why are we stuck? I'm stuck here."
The amazing things that you learn during the draft, specifically the player that went right before him to Buffalo, Radim Maturka. Apparently, his nickname is Mr. Cum.
I saw that one. That was well done.
Yeah, and I'm like, oh, okay, all right. So I've learned that in Czech, his last name sounds like semen.
That's terrifying. Yeah. There were a couple of there was a couple of those bits and pieces. I thought, look, again, in terms of the rest of the picks, like I thought the interesting, we talked about it before, but the idea that the Islanders went and got 2 first-round picks and then no one would trade with them, which again I think is a sign of the way that every organization viewed this. It felt like people were saying that Kent Hughes traded out of those picks simply because it wasn't about Dobson. He just didn't want to have to go through this. He saw the screen, he saw the previews and went, you know what?
No,
I don't need to do that. I don't need to do any of this. I think there were a couple of trades we'll just quickly hit upon, apart from the trades for picks, which were sort of more boring, obviously. It was sort of more about the sort of moves that happened beforehand. So Columbus, again, I mentioned the Columbus and Colorado made a trade, which was very much about Colorado clearing almost $8 million in cap.
Yeah. I mean, look, another like example of, you know, Columbus just adding just like random dudes to
they
the
need
roster.
someone to play for them.
Yeah, they've taken a little bit out of Colorado's lumber pile though with Miles Wood. They still have Blackwood and there's another Wood on them.
Yeah, I can't believe though that they traded for Miles Wood.
Yeah,
his when you bring up his advanced stats, there is almost no player that goes through the floor on advanced stats like Miles Wood does.
There was one point where he was pretty impressive on the Devils. I'm not quite sure what happened, but Blackwood and Wedgwood they still have.
I remain firmly convinced that this is all. There's two moves they're planning. I think that the Avalanche are planning two moves. I think they're planning. Obviously, I think Bowen Byram will probably end up being moved there, and I think the other move is I think they're going after Marner in free agency, and I think they'll do something like 2 or 3 years and try to get him on McKinnon's wing. That's what I'm. Again, this is me. This is not It's not any speculation. I've had this thought for a while. We've talked about this a few times. We finished a podcast the other week where we were debating it, and we wrapped up. And I think the last thing I said to Brendan was, "He's going to the Avs."
Yeah.
And we both went, "Oh shit, you're right. He is going to the Avs."
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense to, you know, kind of replace what they had, but with Rantanen and so forth. Look, the other big trades: JJ Peterka to Utah for Josh Stone and Michael Kesselring. Obviously, a little bit of an underwhelming return for Buffalo. In that regard, look, I don't think that Peterka is guaranteed to be some kind of superstar. There's the potential there that that he could end up being pretty great. There was an extension in place, obviously, that Buffalo didn't want to commit to, which was part of that.
He had apparently said that he was not re-signing.
Yeah. So I mean, look, obviously backed into a corner there from that.
From the organization he wouldn't resign, so they needed to do something. But
yeah, they got another couple of young players back, and like from that perspective, okay, maybe they turn into something decent. But
I would have liked it for Buffalo. I think the Buffalo should have held out for picks as well.
Yeah.
But having said that, while I don't love the deal, I think that the Kesselring bit is a very shrewd bit of business, and I think can work out quite well. He projects out again, and he said projects out at 25, but he's a defenseman, so this is about when they start kicking in.
Yeah,
Kesselring's on a very manageable deal for one more year before you then have to re-sign him. You give him a chance to, him and Rasmus Dahlin and just see what happens there. I think that Kesselring would be quite good. Look, Josh Stone is lineup guy, and sounds really nasty to say about Josh Stone because like the Doan family, but he's not horrible, but he's not ever going to be a breakout beyond like lower lines and sort of doing some grinding.
No, look, there was a big part of him being drafted given his dad's history with
and so that no longer matters in Utah.
Yeah, that no longer is important. But look, obviously it all depends on what JJ Peterka turns into.
Yes.
There was the thought that maybe he could have a big breakout previously. It may still be coming. We'll see how that turns out.
Yeah. I also think that we need to talk about the other two big moves that happened.
Yeah.
Fairly big moves. So let's talk about the Flyers one first because we know I'm going to want a long run up on the other one.
Yeah, I know you're going to want to go off a little bit.
I'm ready. I'm coming off the long run on the other one. So
let me talk about the Flyers one. So Trevor Zegras to the Flyers in return for Ryan Poehling, who is effectively at this point his career guy. Second round pick from Columbus and fourth round pick from Philadelphia. Honestly, I'm a little underwhelmed, in the return from Zegras, but obviously. Trevor Zegras has been kind of underwhelming the last few years as well. I think that there's probably been a lot of his value that's dropped out compared to what at one point the Ducks were hoping it was going to be. So I don't know. I guess that's kind of where he is at this point in his career.
Yeah, when he got moved, it was interesting. There was so much. I don't want to use the word slander, but it's very hard to say anything other than a lot of people going, I can't believe they bothered to trade for Trevor Zegras. And like, that's not something you would have ever heard.
No, I mean, look at he had a pretty big pedigree at one point in time. He's still 24. He has an extension coming up next year. We'll see, I guess, whether or not he can, maybe he'll find some chemistry with Michkov or someone like that.
I mean, the other thing we're looking at too is, remember, like, the Flyers have had a coach change, and the coach they've brought in has a reputation for rebuilding players that struggle. And have had career struggles. So I think that might work out for Zegras, because you've got someone who's, if anyone's going to be able to rebuild his reputation, it will definitely be, what's going on in Philadelphia at the moment. So I think that works out quite nicely.
It's a big opportunity for him, for sure.
Definitely. Okay. The Vancouver Canucks acquire Evander Kane from the Edmonton Oilers for a 2025 fourth-round pick. First of all, how dare you make Stan Bowman and the Edmonton Oilers look like they know what they're doing? How dare you? How dare you make it look like they know what they're doing? I had people defending this on the Australian NHL fans group. I am sorry. There are things I will let you defend, but a fourth-round pick for this, and I had people telling me it was grit. It was hard work. He was going to hold them. I had one person, and again, you're going to hear this.
Hold people accountable.
You're going to hear this, and you're going to tell me off for this. Yeah, the idea that he was going to hold that dressing room accountable.
But who could hold him accountable?
Evander Kane is going to hold that dressing room accountable. The man is incapable of holding himself accountable for anything. And you think he's
held him accountable for anything?
All of these young players are going back on tracksuit because it's Evander Kane. Like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm sorry. It's Evander Kane, right? This man is not capable of holding anyone. And someone else said to me, I don't like it because he's a bit of a douche, but I mean, what else are you going to do? I then listed 7 free agents who all scored the same number of points as him, or 1 or 2 off, who were cheaper. And when I say cheaper, we're not talking about like just cheaper. We're talking about $2 million versus $5.125 million, right? You could have had, including a Canuck who is a free agent, who they're not going to re-sign, who scored more points than Evander Kane and earns $3 million less than him. So really, I don't like the trade.
I mean, look, I think that there's a weird kind of name recognition that Evander Kane still has, and people pretend that he's a different player than he is. I just don't get it. I don't get how he's gained this reputation of being this kind of player that he's just really never been at any point in his career. Like, if anything, his reputation the expectation from him at one point in time was that he could kind of be a little bit of a kind of scorer, but he's never really kind of been, this kind of poor man's Brad Marchand kind of player that people seem to think that he is, and it's just not the case. It doesn't play out in reality.
As well, who talk about the scoring impact that he had on the Edmonton Oilers, right? The scoring impact that this man had on the Edmonton Oilers, right? Playing with the Edmonton Oilers, with McDavid, with Draisaitl, his points tally is 39, 28, and 44. Playing with the 2 best players in the league. His highest, 56 with the San Jose Sharks.
Yeah.
3 years before they moved him, by the way. His best is very much in the rearview mirror. If you can't get points with McDavid and Draisaitl, and you were signed to a $5.125 million contract because your job was to get points with McDavid and Draisaitl, I'm sorry, you are a failure.
Yeah, there are 20-year-old rookies that they've put on those lines that have done pretty much the same thing.
Go back and think of we talk about, all of the rotational players that they've put, in that slot. They've all worked. Jesse Puljujarvi briefly worked. Briefly worked.
It was pretty much a similar output. Basically, Puljujarvi did more or less the same job, but for like $4 million less.
Everybody who plays on McDavid and Draisaitl's wing works to some extent. You are paying $5.125 million to Evander Kane. He should be doing more than what he did, right? And remember, he did not play a single game last year. And they're still having conversations with the league about that because Evander Kane made it absolutely clear he didn't need to have the surgery that the Oilers said he needed to have. So the league are investigating still this idea because he made it absolutely clear he did not require the surgery and that he could have probably played during the season, but they held him out over LTIR, which we'll talk about more in a minute. But this trade is utterly ridiculous. And every time you think that the Vancouver Canucks are working it out and are starting to get out from all of the Jim Benning deals and are starting to get their way out of their cap hell and maybe find some maneuverability, they're going to make a decision in this offseason that is going to see a much younger and a younger and better player walk to free agency. Right? They are literally about to walk Brock Besser to free agency. Yeah. And he is going. And
basically they've given that money to Kane. Like they paid an asset. They paid an asset to take on that anchor. Yeah. I am honestly shocked that what were the competing offers? I can't imagine that any other team was willing to take on that contract without taking back some extra asset.
I had someone try to defend it on the basis of, well, they got a fourth for him, so obviously he's got some value. No. That was all they could get for him because I guarantee you that everyone else demanded that they pay an extra pick and maybe get future considerations. It would have been Evander Kane and a fifth for future considerations. I almost guarantee you that's what the deal was.
That was exactly what I was expecting to see. Like I was expecting to see a team like that had a shitload of cap space opened up, take him on just to breach the cap floor.
But I had people telling me that they got a fourth, so therefore he's worth some level of value. No, he's not. He's really not. Fourth round pick to take $5.1 million on. I guarantee you, none of the teams that have cap space volunteered to take the contract.
No,
that tells you something. Right? No other organization that had cap room available. Like, you can't tell me that if they thought that there was any play left in him, that the Chicago Blackhawks would not have jumped all over Evander Kane to play center for Bedard, to play wing for Bedard. You can't tell me that they wouldn't have given a fourth to have him play with Connor Bedard. Instead, Chicago went, no, not doing that. Right? There is no way that anyone made a better offer than a fourth. And there is no way that anybody else was offering straight up, we'll give you a pick for him. Right? That is never going to have been on the cards. The fact that they did this is ridiculous and shows they do not know what they're doing. They have $7 million in cap space left after taking on Evander Kane. Right? And they've got things they still need to do as an organization. And yet, this is the decision they've come to. The fact that Brock Besser is going to walk and you decided that Evander Kane made sense is baffling. And it goes to show me that as far as I'm concerned, you should, if you are a Vancouver fan, you should have zero faith in anything that's going on there. What did they decide, that there was nobody left to bully the rookies? Is that what they decided? Well, we sent JT Miller out. Someone needs to call all the Swedes stupid names.
So why don't we bring Evander? This locker room isn't toxic enough.
No, it's not toxic enough. We need someone, because someone said to me, "Oh, he's going to play a hard game out there." He doesn't play a hard game. He's soft. He moves every time someone touches him. Like, he doesn't play a hard physical game, right? He chirps, and then some big tough guy goes and punches him in the face. This is what he does. Anyway, moving on. Two re-signings to really talk about. Sam Bennett gets 8x8 in Florida, which is
honestly, he probably saved a lot of team. Like on the fact that he was willing to take that deal in Florida probably saved a heap of teams in free agency from overpaying on that, because he probably would have gotten 9.5 to 10 from some random team that decided that this was what he was going to do for them. I don't hate it, because in terms of like the long-term value of the deal, and the like percentage of the cap, it kind of grades out to be like, by the end of that deal, the $8 million is worth about 5.1 in today's dollars. Yep. I think the last couple of years of the contract are probably not going to be great, because this is his age 30 to 37 years. So probably by the last 2-3 years of that contract, it's probably not going to be an incredible value. But look, I don't mind it. It's fine. It's the same as what he was on previously.
I think the
It's
only person
okay.
who minds it, I think the only person who minds it is his agent, who had to deal with
Yeah,
him
yeah. Obviously, he could have
standing
gotten
up
more
on
somewhere else.
stage, being incredibly drunk and telling everybody that he wasn't leaving.
Yeah,
And
that's it. Yeah,
also,
he
and
kind
also,
of cut the legs out of any kind
yeah,
of competitive offer at that point.
and for all the conversation we had about Marchand, I'm now fairly convinced that Marchand's staying too. It feels like it. That feels like the degree of movement. Tavares gets 4 by 4-3-2 in Toronto after everyone saying that he wasn't going to take under 5.
Yeah, I mean that's a huge haircut. Honestly, it's another real
This is
hometown
the thing,
discount deal.
and I've made this point a few times. Everyone talking about John Tavares is finished and done and he's terrible and he's horrible. I have John Tavares in my fantasy every year. You know this.
Yeah.
Because he's a point getter. He just racks points. That's all he does. Right? He's still got 40. Like he's still playing really well. Is it worth the contract he was on? No. But the idea that he was going to have to take like a really, 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 really low deal somewhere was ridiculous because some team would have paid him over 5. He gave Toronto that haircut because he doesn't want to go.
Yeah.
So he did that 100%. And this steers in nicely to the last part of this conversation, which is Tavares' figure is that because he took a back-ended deal where they're going to pay the last lot of bonuses will be paid out 5 years after the contract. At the tail end of the contract, he will get a back-ended deal, which leads us to the last thing we're going to talk about, the CBA. So a lot of times people will go, don't want to hear about the CBA. It's boring. No, this is not boring. This CBA stuff is really, really, really important. We'll move through this fairly quickly, but there are a couple of things we'll hit.
And honestly, I'm kind of shocked that that this is significant significant kind of changes to what you would usually expect to see from an NHL CBA update.
Some of the stuff that got given up is amazing, by the way. So 84 game season begins in 2026, 2027, but the preseason comes down to 4.
Look, I don't love it. I would have preferred less games, to be honest. It's already kind of long enough.
Veterans can play in a maximum of 2 of the preseason games. So if you played over 100
the season is already absurdly long with the pro season and anything. But...
Exactly. Contract limits. So we've no longer got the 8-year deals. Maximum term will be 7 to re-sign, 6 in free agency. They go away after 25, 26. The important one that people want to talk about, the cap mechanism. The LTIR loophole is now closed. So new rules will prevent stacking injuries and reserve savings to boost playoff rosters. So the rule is the teams will only get LTIR amount equal to the prior season's average league salary, unless the player is definitely out for the entirety of the playoffs. And also the playoff salary cap is now consisting of 20 players in a lineup. The rosters can be shuffled game to game, however. So basically you must have a 20-man roster that is cap compliant per game.
Your roster in a particular game has to be cap compliant, basically.
But
so you can have like 10 guys on, the bench, like not dressing. But
the idea that, for example, it's LTIR equal to the prior season's average league salary. So I think that they pointed out that this year, for example, it was 3.8 million. That's what you get. That's your leeway. So that will stop a lot of the LTIR shenanigans in the playoffs, while also giving the team there's still some flexibility there, but it kind of cuts a lot of that out. Draft rights have all been standardized, which means that teams' rights to keep all drafted players until 822, even if they move leagues, because that used to be different. If they move leagues, you can lose your rights, or the contract rights were different. They've made it the same across the board. The deferred salary, as I mentioned, is now outlawed. Players can no longer accept deferred payments to lower the cap hits, which is why Toronto got that one under today. There is a massive playoff bonus increase. The pool for the playoff pay is now doubled. There's a full breakdown of that online, which I recommend you go and read. There's a lot more money in that pool. E-bugs, the emergency backup goalie rule. Everybody now must carry a full-time e-bug. So in other words, we're no longer going to get a Zamboni driver who works for the Leafs.
Yeah, so I mean, look, it cuts both ways. Like, I think that makes a heap of sense. It realistically, they should have probably always been able to have someone, there in emergency. But it does rule out those situations where you're just getting some random dude from nearby to run down to the rink.
The positive about the move, and I think it's a very important positive to think about, is the positive about the move is that it stops the risk of injuries for somebody who's not qualified or trained to be there. to get some dude to come out and play a period. The speed and how hard people hit nowadays and all those sorts of things. If you get the wrong guy in net who gets injured, there's a lawsuit. So I think that's the right answer. Player benefits, they've had health coverage and post-career support has been expanded. Owners are now covering payroll taxes and workers' comp. That's a massive win for the players. It seems like a really trivial matter. It's a very important win. Dress code freedom. Teams can no longer enforce the dress code for game day arrival or departure because previously you had to wear a suit unless your team said otherwise. Projections. 95.5 million for 25-26, 104 for 26-27, and 113 million for 27-28. So when I say that I think Mitch Marner's doing 2 to 3 years, that's why.
Yeah.
Because that cap's going through the roof.
That makes sense.
The weird one for me, no fitness testing in preseason or regular season. The fact that there's no more fitness testing, is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd one. I'm curious what that extends to specifically, because probably there's some kind of wellness test requirements in terms of, whether or not someone is injured or anything. But probably this is to avoid some kind of we're going to bag skate some guys or whatever to see if they throw up.
I think that might be it. European players aged 25 to 27 no longer have to sign entry-level deals, which is a win for European players coming over and a loss for teams that like taking advantage of weird.
Yeah, and a lot of the time they only got a 1 or 2 year ELC or whatever, but it did kind of stop them from probably coming over a little earlier than they might have otherwise.
Exactly. And the last one is the neck protection. So neck protection is now mandatory for all players entering the league starting 26-27. with a minimum protection level of the A5, which is that we've looked at the guards and stuff like that. Players with at least one NHL game beforehand are grandfathered in and are not subject to the rule, which was the same thing that happened with helmets. It's the same thing that happened with all those sorts of things. So I understand the grandfathering in. I do like the fact that the league managed to get that over the line, though. I think that was a really important one.
It's kind of the same thing as the visor thing. We've basically. Is there anyone left not using a visor? Maybe Jamie Benn and a couple. Is there maybe 2 or 3 players still not using?
I thought Ron Hainsey was the last one.
No, I'm pretty sure Jamie Benn still doesn't.
Oh, Jamie Benn might be.
There's 1 or 2 tough guy kind of guys, but that's pretty much it.
Yeah. So look, overall, there's a lot of changes there. And there's still a lot of stuff coming out about the CBA. So I think we might have a few more things coming out in the next day or so as well. But quite interesting and important changes. The players feel like they got a lot. They also did get approval from the NHL till 2030 for Winter Olympics. So
I would say almost all of this stuff is fairly player friendly. I don't think there's much here. Yeah, I mean, I'm a little shocked with with how much we've had trouble with lockouts and things like that in the past, and all of the the owners not wanting to give up a lot on this. I feel like the players made out pretty well on this.
I think for me, it's because the NHL rights issues are becoming such a big problem in terms of the finances, and they need to keep the money ticking in. Yeah. So I think that Gary, and also remember, they've just announced that the next franchise that comes in is going to cost $2 billion. So Gary doesn't want to do anything to kill the cash cow, and the players don't want to do anything to kill the cash cow. So I think that's why the owners kind of went, you know what, we're going to get a larger pot of money if we just keep this ticking along. If there's any form of lockout, we won't get the rights fees we're getting. And remember, they're about to do a rights negotiation again. So that's really important. This hits about the same time as the rights come up. So if there was a strike pending, the rights would be through the floor, and they're stuffed and they can't afford it, and everyone benefits from the rights going up. So that'll do us, I think. It was a long day, long NHL day. I may return briefly tomorrow afternoon if there's any major moves or trades on day 2, but I don't think there will be. So we'll be back.
Usually we don't see a heap of important stuff, but look, there'll be some free agency stuff coming up pretty soon.
Exactly.
Then hopefully it isn't all written in stone before we get to that.
We'll be back probably early on within free agency, because I think there might be a lot of moves that happen pretty fast. So we'll be back at some point early on in free agency. But thank you very much, everyone, for watching, be it live or on catch up, and we will catch you all later.
See ya.